We look at West Asia and North Africa today and assume the sectarian map has always looked this way, as if history was carved in stone and not shaped in sand. When we think Egypt, we think Sunni Muslims, Iran, Shia Muslims, the Arabian Peninsula, countries ruled by Sunni monarchies over Sunni populations. But what you probably don't know is that this isn't a consequence of the organic progress of peoples along history, but has repeatedly been shaped by the rise and fall of states, dynasties, and empires. Other nations in the region followed similar cycles. Sectarian identity often followed power, not the other way around. And further on, some nations have been caught in the middle between the push and pulls of one sectarian polarity and then the other, depending on geopolitical circumstances. To understand the why of this phenomenon, we must stop reading into the theology and start reading into the politics. Across ancient history, shifts in religion often followed political turnover, as new rulers redefined belief systems to separate themselves from predecessors and to consolidate and secure authority. In Akhenaten's Egypt, Pharaoh Amenhotep IV elevated the god Aten above Amun, challenging a powerful priesthood tied to the previous order. Temples of Amun were closed, its names erased from monuments, and a new capital, Akhetaten, was built to anchor the recentered state. Religion became a direct instrument of royal authority, breaking institutional continuity with the old regime. Another preceding example was during the Roman Empire under Constantine, when imperial patronage shifted towards Christianity after his rise. Funding and legal protection moved from traditional polytheistic temples to Christian bishops. Pagan cults lost public status, while the Council of Nicaea helped standardize doctrine under imperial sponsorship, resulting in the assimilation of the empire's masses into Christianity. These cases reveal a recurring dynamic. Religion often changes most visibly at moments of political succession, when a new regime must define itself against the legitimacy structures of its predecessor or, at times, its competitor. The adoption, elevation, or suppression of belief systems becomes a method of rewriting authority and identity itself. By reshaping sacred legacy systems, rulers not only weakened rival institutions tied to the former order, but also constructed a symbolic boundary between before and after. What begins as political strategy for differentiation transforms into inherited tradition, giving the impression that religious systems evolved naturally, rather than being anchored in the logic of state power and rivalry. The claim that Egypt was once a Shi'i state before returning to Sunni Islam under Saladin sounds shocking at first. That's because modern memory often suggests that Egypt was always this uninterrupted Sunni identity. Yet during the Fatimid era in the 10th to the 13th centuries, Egypt was indeed governed by an Ismaili Shi'i caliphate, one of the most institutionally sophisticated Shi'i states in Islamic history. This wasn't a marginal sectarian presence. It was a ruling ideology embedded in administration, education, and urban life in Cairo. When Salahuddin al-Ayyubi entered Egypt in 1171, his transformation of the state was not immediate theological conversion of the population, but a systematic restructuring of institutions of authority. The Fatimid Caliphate was formally ended, and Sunni Abbasid allegiance was restored. Qadis, the judges affiliated with Shi'i Ismaili jurisprudence, were replaced with Sunni jurists, and khutbas, the state-sponsored weekly preachings in mosques, were reoriented to reflect Sunni orthodoxy. Over time, this produced a full institutional shift in legal and religious authority. The irony lies in the fate of Egypt's intellectual infrastructure. Institutions that had been central to Fatimid Shi'i governance were not destroyed, but repurposed. The most striking example is Al-Azhar Mosque and University, founded under Fatimid rule as a center for Ismaili Shi'i learning. After the Ayyubid transition, its function was gradually redirected towards Sunni jurisprudence. As the medieval Egyptian historian Taqiyuddin al-Maghrizi explains, Al-Azhar was originally established as a Fatimid institution for the propagation of Ismaili doctrine, before being transformed under Ayyubid rule into a bastion of Sunni scholarship. Other Arabic historical sources similarly emphasize the deliberate reversal of Fatimid religious structures, describing the Ayyubid reforms as an effort to restore the Sunnah in Egypt's public life. What emerged is not simply a change of belief among individuals, but a wholesale institutional pivot. Courts, mosques, and schools, once built to sustain Shi'i governance, became the backbone of Sunni legal tradition. Even the idea of continuity, Cairo as a timeless Sunni intellectual capital, is itself a product of this political reconfiguration. The rise of the Safavid Empire in the early 16th century marked one of the most decisive religious reorientations in Islamic history. This wasn't a gradual spiritual drift by any means, but a deliberate state project of differentiation from the Ottoman Sunni world. When Shah Ismail I captured Tabriz in 1501, he declared Twelver Shi'ism the official doctrine of his realm, embedding it into the machinery of governance as a defining marker of sovereignty. This shift was inseparable from geopolitical rivalry. The Ottomans, as the dominant Sunni power, represented both a political and ideological counterweight. In response, the Safavid state constructed its legitimacy through contrast. Religious alignment became political separation. To be Safavid was increasingly to be anything but Ottoman. The transformation was systematic. Contemporary chroniclers such as Hassan Bey Rumlu describe campaigns of coercive conversion, especially in the early decades of Safavid consolidation, alongside the execution and exile of Sunni scholars who resisted doctrinal change. Sunni legal institutions were dismantled and replaced with Shi'i jurisprudence. To compensate for the lack of a domestic clerical class, Safavid rulers imported scholars from Lebanon's Jabal Amil, Iraq, and Bahrain, embedding an external scholarly infrastructure into the Safavid state. Courts and mosques were restructured, while public ritual life was redirected towards Shi'i commemorations such as Ashura, which became central expressions of political as well as religious identity. Shah Ismail's authority thus extended far beyond kingship. He repositioned himself as both Shah and guardian of sacred order, fusing political sovereignty with religious guardianship in a way that left no institutional space outside state ideology. This fusion allowed the Safavid state to redefine orthodoxy in opposition to Ottoman Sunnism, turning denominational difference into a tool of imperial identity. Sunni communities faced a combination of pressure conversion, elite replacement, migration of Sunni scholars to Ottoman, Indian, and Central Asian territories, and gradual social absorption. By the late Safavid period, Iran had become predominantly Shia, with Sunni populations surviving mainly in peripheral regions such as Khuzestan, Baluchistan, and the Turkmen northeast, where geography limited full administrative penetration. What began as dynastic rivalry ultimately produced one of the most enduring sectarian realignments in the Muslim world: Iran as a Shia state, anchored not in theology alone, but in the political necessity of distinction. Please check out our new course on how to navigate Arab identity in today's world, how to define and pinpoint yourself within the various tensions found in the duality of tradition and modernity, the foundations that make us unique, even our contradictions. Unapologetically Arab is a 13-chapter course intent on helping anyone interested in appreciating what it means to be an Arab. Join now by clicking on the link in the video description at either Thinkific or Patreon and begin your empowering journey of Arab discovery. Across Western Asian history, there are cases where political authority shifts without a full transformation of population belief, producing a persistent gap between who governs and who's governed. Unlike Iran and Egypt, where institutions reshaped religious identity over time, places like Bahrain and Syria illustrate a different pattern: sectarian continuity in the population paired with sectarian inversion at the level of power. In Bahrain, after the 1783 Al Khalifa conquest, the indigenous Baharna population remained predominantly Shi'i, while political authority passed to Sunni tribal elites from the Bani Utub Confederation. As noted by the Omani historian Hamid ibn Ruzaiq's accounts of Gulf political change, control was secured not through mass conversion, but through consolidation of strategic power centers such as forts, taxation systems, and maritime trade routes. Over time, governance relied on tribal alliances and external recognition, particularly British diplomatic backing in the 19th century, which stabilized ruling authority without altering the underlying demographic composition. Shi'i communities remained rooted in lower to mid-level social classes and were largely excluded from core political structures. And this is the status quo we see in Bahrain to this very day. A similar structural dynamic appears in Syria during the 20th century, particularly after the rise of the Ba'ath Party and the consolidation of military power in the 1960s. The officer corps, heavily drawn from rural and minority backgrounds, mainly involving Alawi communities, gained control of the state apparatus, while the broader Sunni urban population retained demographic majority. Sami Mubayyit, the Syrian historian, describes how the military security state gradually absorbed decision-making power into a narrow network of officers and intelligence institutions. Sunni institutions in cities like Damascus and Aleppo continued to exist, but political authority increasingly operated through security structures rather than traditional urban elites. In both Bahrain and Syria, the result was not mass sectarian conversion, but political centralization over a demographically different society. The state presented itself externally as unified, while internally managing a population whose religious identity remained largely unchanged, contained within systems of governance, surveillance, and controlled representation. Denominational identity has not yet settled into a fixed political form in countries such as Iraq and Yemen, where Sunni and Shi'i populations exist in relatively close balance. Power has often resembled a revolving door rather than a stable equilibrium. Authority shifts through cycles of internal fragmentation, elite competition, and external intervention, each reshaping who holds the instruments of the state without fully transforming the underlying social fabric. In Iraq, modern history has seen successive reconfigurations of power, from monarchy to republican coups, Ba'athist centralization, and post-2003 redistribution of authority under new political competitions. In Yemen, layered tribal structures, Zaydi and Sunni regions, and repeated external involvement have produced overlapping centers of influence rather than a single dominant order. In both cases, political control has frequently moved faster than any deep change in religious or communal identity. This raises a broader question about the direction of historical change. It's often assumed that belief systems of populations determine political outcomes. Yet across these patterns, the more consistent force is the reverse. It's those who hold power who shape the visible religious identity of the state. Populations endure, rulers rotate, and with each rotation, the public face of a nation may shift, while its underlying social composition remains remarkably continuous.